The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of the Galactic Federation's primary monitoring station on Kepler 442b, their shrill wails piercing through the usual hum of machinery and quiet chatter of the night shift. Commander Zefra Voss, a tall, blue-skinned Altarian with silver eyes that reflected her species' natural ability to perceive electromagnetic frequencies, shot up from her rest pod like a coiled spring. "Status report," she barked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too many genuine emergencies to mistake this for a drill. Her webbed fingers danced across the holographic interface as she rushed to the central command station. Lieutenant Kekstar, a four-armed Brellan whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the emergency lighting, looked up from his console with all four eyes wide with what humans might recognize as terror. "Commander, we're receiving a priority alpha distress signal from the outer rim sectors. It's not good." Zefra felt her heart skip a beat. Priority alpha meant extinction-level threat. In the 300 years since the Galactic Federation had been established, they had received exactly 7 priority alpha signals. 6 of those had resulted in the complete annihilation of entire star systems before help could arrive. "Show me," she commanded, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. A pulsing red dot appeared in the far reaches of the outer rim, beyond the usual trade routes and well outside the Federation's normal patrol zones. But what made Zefra's blood run cold wasn't the location, it was the identity of the sender. "By the ancient stars," she whispered. "That's the Ethereal Collective's signal." The Ethereal Collective was legendary throughout the galaxy, spoken of in hushed tones by even the most battle-hardened Federation officers. They were an ancient civilization that had achieved a level of technological advancement that bordered on the divine. Their ships could phase through solid matter, their weapons could disrupt the very fabric of spacetime, and their collective consciousness spanned multiple dimensions. They were so powerful that they had transcended the need for traditional matter-based existence centuries ago. If the Ethereal Collective was sending a priority alpha distress signal, then something was very, very wrong with the universe. "Decode the message," Zefra ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. The transmission crackled to life, filled with static and the distinctive harmonic resonance that marked all ethereal communications. But beneath the usual ethereal tones, there was something else: raw, primal terror. "To all sentient beings of the galaxy," the message began, the voice somehow managing to sound both ancient and desperately urgent. "This is High Consciousness Morvith of the Ethereal Collective. We are under attack by entities from beyond our dimension. Our defenses are failing. Our people are dying. We require immediate assistance from the strongest military force in the galaxy." The message paused, and when it resumed, the desperation was even more apparent. "We know of your legends. We know of the Deathworlders. We know of Earth and its children. If there is any truth to the stories, if they are truly as formidable as the galaxy believes, then we beg you, summon them. Summon the human fleet. They are our only hope." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Zefra stared at the screen, her mind racing. The Ethereal Collective was asking for help from humans. Humans, the species that most of the galaxy considered to be savage, barely civilized creatures from a world so hostile that it had been classified as a Class 12 death world. "Commander," Lieutenant Kekstar said softly, "what are your orders?" Zefra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had met humans before, during the first contact protocols 20 years ago. They had seemed intense. Frighteningly so. Where most species had evolved on worlds with stable climates and predictable ecosystems, humans had evolved on a planet that seemed actively hostile to life. They had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and countless other disasters that would have wiped out most species. But that same hostile environment had forged them into something unique. They were adaptable, resilient, and absolutely relentless when threatened. They had technological capabilities that rivaled the Federation's best, but what truly set them apart was their willingness to fight against impossible odds. "Send a flash transmission to Earth," she said finally. "Priority Alpha authorization. Tell them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell them that the galaxy needs them.
Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UES Indomitable, watching the blue-green marble of Earth slowly rotate below her.
At 52, she was young for a fleet admiral, but her prematurely gray hair and the network of fine scars on her hands told the story of someone who had earned her position through experience rather than politics. The Indomitable was the flagship of the United Earth Space Force, a massive dreadnought that stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was scarred from countless battles, each mark telling a story of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. But despite its battle damage, the ship radiated an aura of barely contained power that made even seasoned Federation officers nervous. Admiral, her aide, Commander Marcus Rivera, approached with a tablet in his hand.
"We've received a priority alpha transmission from the Galactic Federation. It's unusual."
Sarah turned away from the viewport, her dark eyes focusing on the younger officer. Rivera had been with her for 3 years, and she had learned to read his expressions. The combination of excitement and concern on his face meant that whatever was in that transmission was significant.
"Define unusual," she said, accepting the tablet. "The Ethereal Collective is under attack by extra-dimensional entities. They're specifically requesting human assistance." Sarah's eyebrows rose. The Ethereal Collective was a name that carried weight even among humans. They were the oldest, most advanced civilization in the galaxy, and they had never asked for help from anyone. The fact that they were calling for human assistance was unprecedented. She read through the transmission quickly, her expression growing grimmer with each line. When she finished, she looked up at Rivera. "How long since this was sent?" "6 hours, ma'am."
The transmission was delayed by the distance and the need to route it through Federation channels.
6 hours.
In a battle against extra-dimensional entities, 6 hours could mean the difference between salvation and total annihilation. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders like a comfortable old coat.
"Alert the fleet," she ordered. "All ships are to report ready for immediate deployment. And get me a direct line to Fleet Command." "Ma'am, shouldn't we wait for official authorization?"
Sarah looked at him with the expression that had earned her the nickname Iron Chen among her subordinates. "Commander, if the Ethereal Collective is asking for our help, then the situation is already beyond the point where we can afford to wait for bureaucratic approval.
The fleet moves now."
Rivera nodded and hurried off to carry out her orders. Sarah turned back to the viewport, but instead of seeing Earth, she was already visualizing star charts and jump coordinates. The human fleet would need to cross half the galaxy to reach the Ethereal Collective's territory, and they would need to do it faster than any fleet in history.
Fortunately, humans had a reputation for doing the impossible.
The first ships to respond to Admiral Chen's call were the destroyers of the 3rd Fast Attack Squadron. They came screaming out of Earth's orbital shipyards like angry wasps, their sleek hulls bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. The destroyers were followed by the cruisers of the 7th Heavy Squadron, their massive forms dwarfing the smaller ships as they took up formation. But it was the arrival of the battleships that truly announced humanity's intent to the galaxy. The UES Ragnarok, the UES Apocalypse, and the UES Nemesis dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their kilometer-long hulls casting shadows across the orbital platforms. Each battleship carried enough firepower to reduce a planet to rubble, and their mere presence seemed to make the space around them tense with anticipation.
"Fleet status report," Sarah ordered as she settled into the command chair on the Indomitable's bridge.
"All ships reporting ready for hyperspace jump," her tactical officer, Captain Jessica Wong, replied. "We have 47 vessels in total, 1 command dreadnought, 3 battleships, 12 cruisers, 24 destroyers, and 7 support vessels."
Sarah nodded.
It was a smaller force than she would have liked, but it was what they had available on short notice.
The rest of the human fleet was scattered across the galaxy, protecting human colonies and maintaining their patrol routes. "Captain Wong," she said, "what's our best estimate for travel time to the Ethereal Collective's territory?" Wong consulted her console.
"Using standard hyperspace routes, approximately 14 days. But Admiral, if we use the Kepler corridor and risk the gravity wells around the neutron stars, we could cut that down to 8 days. The Kepler corridor was a hyperspace route that most species avoided like the plague. It required navigating through the gravity wells of 3 neutron stars, any one of which could tear a ship apart if the calculations were off by even a fraction of a percent.
Most Federation vessels wouldn't even attempt it. But humans weren't most species. "Set course for the Kepler corridor," Sarah ordered.
"And alert all ships to prepare for extreme hyperspace conditions." The fleet began its jump sequence, reality warping around the ships as they prepared to enter hyperspace. Sarah watched the process with the calm professionalism of someone who had done this hundreds of times before, but in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was different.
The ethereal collective had existed for millennia.
They had survived the rise and fall of countless civilizations, had witnessed the birth and death of stars, and had transcended the physical limitations that bound most species. If something was threatening them, something that their advanced technology couldn't handle, then humanity was about to face a threat unlike anything they had ever encountered. The fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving only the faint gravitational ripples that marked their passage. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that its children were racing toward a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The hyperspace journey through the Kepler corridor was a nightmare of gravitational shears and quantum fluctuations. Normal spacetime became a suggestion rather than a rule, and the ship's sensors registered readings that hurt to look at directly. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as her helmsman fought to keep the ship on course through the twisted maze of warped space. Gravity wave approaching from starboard, the navigator called out, his voice tight with concentration.
"Neutron star Sigma 7 is showing signs of magnetic field fluctuation.
Adjust course by 2 degrees port," Sarah ordered.
"And increase power to the inertial dampeners."
The ship groaned as it fought against forces that could have crushed a lesser vessel like an egg. Around them, the other ships of the fleet maintained their formation with the precision that came from years of training and the absolute trust that human crews placed in their technology and each other. "Admiral," Communications Officer Lieutenant Sarah Kim spoke up, "we're receiving a transmission from the UES Ragnarok. Captain Morrison reports that they're experiencing some unusual sensor readings."
Sarah frowned.
The Ragnarok was one of their most advanced battleships, equipped with sensors that could detect a pin drop on the other side of a star system. If they were picking up something unusual, it was worth investigating.
"Put him through," she ordered.
Captain Morrison's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim.
"Admiral, you need to see this. We're picking up some kind of energy signature about 6 light-years ahead of our position. It's not natural."
Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They were still 3 days away from the ethereal collective's territory, which meant that whatever was generating that energy signature was between them and their destination.
"Can you identify the source?" she asked. Morrison shook his head. "Negative. It's unlike anything in our databases.
The energy patterns are alien, doesn't even begin to describe it. It's like someone took the fundamental forces of the universe and twisted them into shapes that shouldn't exist."
Sarah nodded grimly.
She had a feeling that they were about to get their first taste of what the ethereal collective was facing. "All ships, maintain course but increase sensor resolution," she ordered. "And prepare for possible combat encounter." The fleet continued its journey through the Kepler corridor, but now there was a new tension in the air. The crews went about their duties with the efficiency of professionals, but Sarah could see the way they moved, the way they checked their weapons and ran system diagnostics. They were preparing for war. 2 days later, they got their first glimpse of the enemy. The UES Phantom, a stealth destroyer running point for the fleet, was the first to encounter them. Captain Lisa Park's voice crackled over the comm system, tight with barely controlled fear.
"Admiral, we've got contact. Multiple bogies, bearing 247 Mark 85.
There.
Admiral, they're not showing up on our sensors properly.
It's like they're only partially in our dimension." Sarah felt her heart rate increase.
"Can you get a visual?" "Trying, ma'am. Switching to quantum resonance imaging." "Dear God."
The main screen flickered to life, showing a grainy image that seemed to shift and writhe even as they watched. The ships, if they could be called ships, were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They appeared to be made of some kind of crystalline material that bent light around itself, creating optical illusions that made it difficult to determine their true size or shape. But it was their movement that truly unsettled Sarah. The vessels moved in ways that defied physics, sliding through space like living things, their forms constantly shifting and changing. They seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their edges blurring as they phased in and out of normal spacetime.
How many?
Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through her veins.
Difficult to count, ma'am. They seem to be multiplying. Or maybe we're seeing the same ships from different dimensional perspectives. Best estimate is somewhere between 12 and 40 vessels. Sarah nodded.
The uncertainty was almost as troubling as the enemy themselves.
How do you fight an enemy that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously?
All ships, battle stations, she ordered.
Prepare for engagement.
The human fleet smoothly shifted from travel formation to battle formation, the ships spreading out to maximize their firepower coverage while maintaining mutual support. It was a maneuver they had practiced countless times, but never against an enemy like this. The interdimensional ships seemed to sense the humans' aggressive intent. They began to move faster, their crystalline forms pulsing with an eerie light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal space. And then, without warning, they attacked.
The first salvo came from nowhere and everywhere at once.
Beams of energy that seemed to be made of pure entropy lanced out from the alien ships, striking the destroyer UES Vanguard. The ship's shields flared and collapsed in seconds, and the energy beams began to eat through the hull like acid.
Vanguard is taking heavy damage, Captain Wong reported.
They're reporting hull breaches on decks 7 through 12.
Sarah watched as the Vanguard's captain, Commander Sarah Johnson, fought to keep her ship together. The destroyer's point defense systems were firing wildly, trying to intercept the alien energy beams, but they seemed to pass through normal matter as if it didn't exist.
All ships, open fire,
Sarah ordered.
Target the lead vessels. The human fleet responded with a thunderous barrage of weapons fire.
Plasma cannons, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles streaked through space toward the alien ships.
But something was wrong. Many of the shots seemed to pass right through their targets without causing any damage. Admiral, Captain Wong called out, our weapons are having minimal effect.
The enemy ships are phasing in and out of our dimension.
We're only hitting them when they're fully materialized.
Sarah cursed under her breath. They were fighting an enemy that could choose when to be vulnerable to their weapons.
It was like trying to punch smoke. But humans had faced impossible odds before.
All ships, synchronize your targeting systems, she ordered.
We're going to predict their phase patterns and time our shots accordingly. It was a desperate gambit, but it was the kind of tactical innovation that had made humanity feared throughout the galaxy. The human fleet began to analyze the enemy's movement patterns, their computers working to predict when each ship would be fully materialized. The results were immediate and devastating. The first coordinated salvo caught 3 alien ships fully materialized, and the combined firepower of the human fleet reduced them to crystalline debris in seconds. The other alien ships seemed to recoil, their movements becoming more erratic. But the victory was short-lived.
The remaining alien ships began to adapt, their phase patterns becoming more random and unpredictable. Worse, they seemed to be learning from the human tactics, their own weapons becoming more accurate and more devastating.
The battle raged for hours, with both sides taking heavy losses. The human fleet lost 2 destroyers and a cruiser, while the aliens lost roughly half their number. But Sarah could see that they were fighting a losing battle. The enemy ships were regenerating, somehow rebuilding themselves from the crystalline debris of their destroyed comrades. Admiral, Captain Wong said quietly, we're running low on ammunition, and the enemy is adapting faster than we can counter them.
Sarah nodded grimly.
They had given as good as they got, but this was clearly just a scouting force. If this was what the ethereal collective was facing in large numbers, then she was beginning to understand why they had called for help. All ships, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump, she ordered.
We're breaking off the engagement. The human fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving the alien ships behind. But Sarah knew that this was just the beginning.
They had encountered the enemy, and now they had some idea of what they were up against.
The question was, would it be enough to save the ethereal collective?
The ethereal collective's home system was a wonder to behold, even under siege. 7 planets orbited a binary star system, each world transformed into a paradise of crystal spires and floating cities that defied conventional physics. The very space around the planets shimmered with energy fields that bent light and gravity to the collective's will. But as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, it was clear that this paradise was dying. The first thing Sarah noticed was the debris field. What had once been a magnificent orbital ring around the third planet was now a twisted wreckage of crystalline fragments and twisted metal. The energy fields that had once protected the system were flickering and failing, their beautiful patterns disrupted by tears in the fabric of spacetime itself. And everywhere, the enemy ships swarmed like locusts. "My God," Captain Wong whispered, staring at the tactical display.
"There are thousands of them." Sarah nodded grimly.
The interdimensional invaders had filled the system with their crystalline ships, their forms constantly shifting and multiplying as they moved between dimensions. They were systematically destroying everything in their path, their entropy weapons dissolving the collective's magnificent constructions into component atoms. "Admiral," Communications Officer Kim called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface."
"It's from the ethereal collective."
"Put it through," Sarah ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was recognizable as the same one from the original distress call, but now it was filled with exhaustion and despair.
"Human vessels, this is High Consciousness Morvith. We are grateful for your response, but I fear you have arrived too late.
Our defenses have fallen, and the enemy has begun consuming our dimensional anchors."
Sarah frowned. "Dimensional anchors?"
"The constructs that allow us to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously," Morvith explained.
"Without them, we will be forced into single-dimensional existence. We will become mortal."
Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The ethereal collective was facing something worse than death. They were facing a return to the physical limitations that most species took for granted. For beings who had transcended matter itself, it was the ultimate horror.
"How long do you have?" she asked.
"Hours, perhaps less.
The enemy is adapting to our defenses faster than we can modify them.
They are learning our technology and turning it against us."
Sarah looked at the tactical display, calculating odds and possibilities.
The human fleet had 44 ships remaining after their encounter with the enemy scouts. The interdimensional invaders had thousands of vessels in the system, and they were clearly more advanced than anything the humans had faced before.
By any rational calculation, this was a suicide mission. But humans had never been particularly rational.
"All ships, prepare for full system assault," she ordered.
"We're going in."
"Admiral," Captain Wong said quietly, "the odds." "I know the odds, Captain," Sarah interrupted.
"But we didn't come here to calculate probabilities. We came here to fight."
The human fleet began to move into the system, their formation tight and disciplined. The interdimensional ships immediately began to converge on them, their crystalline forms pulsing with malevolent energy. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "High Consciousness Morvith is hailing us again."
"Put him through."
"Admiral Chen," Morvith's voice was filled with wonder, "your ships are moving into certain death."
"Why?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Because that's what humans do.
We fight impossible battles because someone has to, and we're too stubborn to know when to quit." There was a long pause, and when Morvith spoke again, his voice was filled with something that might have been hope. "Then perhaps the legends are true after all." The first wave of enemy ships hit the human fleet like a tsunami of crystalline death. The interdimensional vessels phased in and out of normal space, their entropy weapons seeking to dissolve the human ships at the molecular level. But the humans had learned from their previous encounter, and they were ready. The UES Ragnarok led the charge, her massive guns firing in carefully timed salvos that caught the enemy ships during their materialized phases. The battleship's captain, Morrison, had developed a new tactic. Instead of trying to predict the enemy's phase patterns, he was using broad-spectrum gravitational pulses to force them into normal space. "Ragnarok to all ships," Morrison's voice crackled over the comm system.
"Gravity pulse on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark."
All the human ships fired their gravitational pulse generators simultaneously, creating a massive distortion in spacetime that forced the interdimensional ships to fully materialize.
For a brief moment, the enemy was vulnerable, and the human fleet made them pay for it.
The combined firepower of 44 human warships was a terrible thing to behold.
Plasma cannons carved through crystalline hulls, particle beams shattered alien weapons, and kinetic projectiles punched through armor that had seemed impervious moments before.
In the space of 30 seconds, the humans destroyed over 100 enemy vessels. But there were thousands more.
The interdimensional ships adapted quickly, their phase patterns becoming more random and chaotic.
They began to concentrate their fire, focusing on the human destroyers and cruisers. The UES Intrepid was the first to fall, her hull dissolving under the concentrated entropy beams. The UES Stalwart followed moments later, her crew fighting to the last second before their ship was consumed by the alien weapons. "We're taking heavy losses," Captain Wong reported, her voice tense.
"The enemy is adapting faster than we can counter them."
Sarah watched as another of her ships died, the crew of the UES Defiance selling their lives dearly as they rammed their crippled vessel into a cluster of enemy ships. The explosion took out a dozen interdimensional vessels, but it was a drop in the ocean compared to the enemy numbers.
"Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Ethereal Collective. They're saying they have a way to help us." Sarah looked up from the tactical display. "What kind of help?"
High consciousness Morvatha's voice filled the bridge, but now it carried a note of desperate determination.
"Admiral, we can temporarily enhance your vessel's dimensional stability.
It will allow your weapons to affect the enemy regardless of their phase state.
But the process is dangerous." "Define dangerous," Sarah said, watching as the UES Nemesis barely avoided a concentrated enemy attack.
"The enhancement process requires us to merge our consciousness with your ship's systems temporarily. We will be able to guide your weapons and tactics, but if your ships are destroyed while we are linked, we will die as well." Sarah felt a cold calculation run through her mind.
The Ethereal Collective was offering to put their own lives at risk to help humanity fight their battle.
It was the kind of sacrifice that demanded respect, regardless of the outcome. "Do it," she said without hesitation.
"Admiral," Captain Wong protested, "we don't know what this will do to our ships or our crews."
"We're losing this battle, Captain," Sarah replied.
"If we don't try something drastic, we're all going to die anyway." The enhancement process began immediately. Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation as the Ethereal Collective's consciousness merged with the Indomitable systems.
Her vision suddenly expanded beyond the normal spectrum, and she could see the interdimensional ships in their full, terrifying glory.
They were massive, far larger than they had appeared on the sensors.
Each ship was a living thing, its crystalline structure pulsing with the stolen life force of countless civilizations. They moved through dimensions like predators, seeking new realities to consume and new technologies to adapt. But now, with the Ethereal Collective's consciousness guiding their targeting systems, the human fleet could see them clearly. And what they saw made them angry. "All ships, weapons free," Sarah ordered, her voice carrying a new edge of fury. "Let's show these things what happens when they threaten our galaxy." The human fleet's next salvo was unlike anything they had fired before. Each shot was guided by the Ethereal Collective's advanced understanding of dimensional mechanics, and every beam found its target regardless of the enemy's phase state. The interdimensional ships began to die in massive numbers, their crystalline forms shattering under the precisely directed firepower.
But the enemy was not helpless.
They began to adapt once again, their movements becoming more coordinated and their weapons more focused. They seemed to realize that the humans had gained some kind of advantage, and they were determined to eliminate it. The battle reached a crescendo as both sides threw everything they had at each other. Human ships traded their lives for enemy vessels, their crews fighting with the desperate courage of those who knew they were buying time for something greater than themselves. And then, just when it seemed like the tide was turning in humanity's favor, the enemy revealed their true nature. The interdimensional ships began to merge together, their crystalline forms flowing like liquid as they combined into larger and larger vessels. Within moments, the thousands of smaller ships had become dozens of massive dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon. "Dear God," Captain Wong whispered, staring at the tactical display.
they're not individual ships.
They're fragments of something much larger.
Sarah nodded grimly.
The enemy hadn't been sending ships into their dimension, they had been sending pieces of themselves, testing the waters before committing to a full invasion. And now that they had learned what they needed to know, they were revealing their true power. The merged dreadnoughts began to move toward the human fleet, their weapons charging with an energy that made space itself recoil. Sarah realized that they were about to face something that made their previous battles look like training exercises.
All ships, emergency formation Delta, she ordered. Concentrate all firepower on the lead dreadnought.
The human fleet responded with the discipline of veterans, their remaining ships forming a defensive formation around the Indomitable.
But Sarah could see that they were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned.
The merged dreadnoughts were simply too large and too powerful to defeat with conventional weapons. That's when High Consciousness Morveth made his final gambit. "Admiral," his voice rang through the ship's communications system, "there is one more thing we can do.
We can transfer our remaining dimensional energy directly to your weapons systems. It will give you the power to destroy the enemy dreadnoughts, but it will also mean the end of the Ethereal Collective."
Sarah felt her heart stop. "You're talking about sacrificing your entire civilization."
"We are already dying, Admiral. The enemy has consumed our dimensional anchors, and we cannot survive in single-dimensional existence.
But we can choose how we die, and we choose to die fighting alongside the humans who answered our call for help." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an entire civilization's sacrifice settling on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her voice was steady and determined.
"Do it!"
The transformation was instantaneous. The human fleet's weapons suddenly blazed with an energy that seemed to come from the very fabric of reality itself. The ship's hulls began to glow with the same ethereal light that had once surrounded the collective cities, and their weapons became conduits for power that transcended normal physics.
"All ships, final attack," Sarah ordered.
"Make their sacrifice count." The human fleet charged toward the enemy dreadnoughts with a fury that surprised even themselves. Their weapons, now enhanced by the Ethereal Collective's dimensional energy, tore through the crystalline armor like paper. The enemy ships began to scream, a sound that echoed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The UES Ragnarok was the first to reach the enemy formation, her guns blazing with borrowed power. Captain Morrison's voice rang out over the comm system, "For the Ethereal Collective.
For humanity. For the galaxy."
The battleship's final salvo punched through the lead dreadnought's hull, and the interdimensional vessel began to collapse in on itself. The crystalline structure that had seemed so impervious moments before now cracked and shattered, releasing energies that had been stolen from countless civilizations across the galaxy. One by one, the enemy dreadnoughts fell to the human fleet's enhanced weapons. But the cost was terrible. The Ethereal Collective's consciousness began to fade as their dimensional energy was consumed, their ancient voices growing weaker with each passing moment. "Admiral," Morveth's voice was now barely a whisper, "we are honored to have fought alongside you.
The galaxy will remember this day."
And then he was gone, along with the rest of the Ethereal Collective. The oldest, most advanced civilization in the galaxy had sacrificed themselves to give humanity the power to defeat an enemy that threatened all existence. The last enemy dreadnought fell just as the borrowed power began to fade from the human ships. The interdimensional invaders had been defeated, but the victory had come at a terrible cost. The human fleet was reduced to just 12 ships, and the Ethereal Collective was extinct. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking out at the debris field that had once been the enemy fleet. The space around them was filled with the crystalline fragments of destroyed ships, but already the pieces were beginning to fade as they returned to their native dimension. "Admiral," Captain Wong said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. Fleet Command is asking for a status report." Sarah nodded, but she didn't take her eyes off the viewport.
"How do you report the end of an entire civilization? How do you explain that the galaxy's most advanced species had chosen to die rather than let an interdimensional threat consume everything they had built?"
"Tell them," she said finally, "that the mission was a success.
The enemy has been defeated, and the galaxy is safe." "And the Ethereal Collective?"
Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of their sacrifice like a physical pain in her chest.
Tell them that they died as heroes.
And that their sacrifice will not be forgotten. The journey back to Earth took longer than the journey out, partly because of the damage the fleet had sustained, but mostly because Sarah wanted time to process what had happened. The human fleet had saved the galaxy, but the cost had been almost too high to bear. The ethereal collective was gone, their magnificent cities now empty and their advanced technology slowly failing without their consciousness to guide it. The interdimensional invaders had been defeated, but Sarah knew that there would be other threats, other enemies that would test the galaxy's defenses. But humanity had proven something important during the battle. They had shown that the legends were true, that humans were indeed the galaxy's ultimate warriors, capable of fighting impossible battles and winning against overwhelming odds. More importantly, they had shown that they were willing to fight not just for themselves, but for all sentient life in the galaxy. As the fleet approached Earth, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching her home world grow larger in the viewport.
The planet looked peaceful and serene, its blue oceans and white clouds unchanged by the cosmic battle that had raged in the distant reaches of the galaxy.
"Admiral," Captain Wong said, joining her at the viewport, "the crews are asking what we're going to do with the ethereal collective's territory. Their worlds are still intact, but without their consciousness to maintain them, the systems will eventually fail."
Sarah nodded. It was a question that had been weighing on her mind throughout the journey home.
The ethereal collective's planets contained technologies and knowledge that could advance human civilization by centuries, but they had also been a gift from a dying species that had trusted humanity with their greatest sacrifice.
"We'll establish a memorial system," she said finally.
"Their worlds will be preserved as a monument to their sacrifice, and the knowledge they left behind will be studied and shared with all the species of the galaxy."
"It's what they would have wanted." Captain Wong smiled. "Yes, ma'am. I think you're right." The fleet entered Earth's orbital space to a hero's welcome.
Ships from every human colony and outpost had gathered to greet them, their crews cheering over the communication channels. The media was calling it the greatest military victory in human history, and politicians were already making speeches about humanity's role as the galaxy's protector.
But Sarah knew better. The victory had not been won by human weapons or human tactics.
It had been won by the sacrifice of an entire civilization that had chosen to die rather than let evil triumph. The humans had simply been the instrument of that sacrifice, the means by which the ethereal collective had chosen to make their final stand. As the Indomitable docked at the orbital station, Sarah prepared her final report.